Is the selling over? Did the market finally bottom? We got a lot on the calendar over the next 2 weeks, so I'm just going to hop right into the charts, give you a sense of where I think the market is headed. Did we actually find a bottom yet? And then we'll hop into a bunch of different stocks that I'm looking at for some high quality setups. So if you look at, this is the S&P 500, the SPY ETF, you can see that I did talk about this lower sneaky trend line that was eventually going to be tested. We had two reactions previously, and then we just actually hit support and then bounced from that 565, 566 level. I did buy SPY calls when we got down to that level, and then once Jerome Powell showed up on Friday, we had a nice push to the upside. But earlier in the week, you can see that we did have that breakdown of this other uptrend, right? So SPY has come down, reacted twice, and then finally broke through. We actually were forming a bear flag under resistance. So I knew that we were going to eventually break this down with some high probability chance. And that's exactly what happened, right? So a lot of people were trying to chase these moves to the upside, but we never invalidated that bearish structure on the market. And then eventually we did break that flag down and we headed towards that 565 support. And there was also that sneaky trend line here right around 568, 569. But we did bounce out of that zone. I personally am not sure if we actually found a bottom in the market because, for one, we are still within the quarterly option expiration period, right? So a lot of people are still in VIX calls. People are still buying puts. A lot of those actually don't expire until March 21st, and then you have VIX expiration on March 17th. So we might continue a bit lower. Even on Friday, there's actually 66% up volume. It was about 50-50 on the day. For a selling event, which is like a capitulation move, you'd want to see this closer to 90% down volume. So a lot of sellers. And then that usually means that there's at some point not going to be any more sellers. And then you're going to have opposite reaction in the market and you'll have a really strong bounce. And then, my logic was maybe we get to this 565 level, VIX would be over 30 and down volume would be over 90%. And then we would have an actual bottom somewhere in this like 565 to 560 level. We got the 566 and bounced out of there, but not on a ton of volume, as you can see. So I don't really know for certain if the bottom in the market is. So I'm still being very cautious. There could be a selling event later this week, and then, potentially even the following week, the week of March 17th to the 21st. I do think the bottom will occur before the 21st because of the expiration of all these different contracts. And then probably in the later half of March, even into early April, you'll probably have some sort of relief rally in the market. So that's how I'm playing like the calendar from like a pure market mechanic perspective. But if I was to look at these levels, obviously we still have this like volume shelf around 557 to 560. So we could certainly bounce from that level, a pop over VIX. Like if we somehow gap down, and Bitcoin's not doing that well this weekend, so it's possible that futures might actually gap down on US equities. If that happened, I'd be looking around this 558 to 560 level, and even potentially down to this lower volume node around 552 if VIX really gets to the upside. But I do think at some point there will be a selling capitulation event. That's what we're really looking for, because then we can play SPY calls and we would have like a strong move up to 568 or even potentially all the way back up to this 584 level that we've bounced off of a few different times. And then we would be somewhat in a downtrend at that point and we'd probably fall once again. But this move that would play out would be a huge opportunity for us to make a lot of money over a 1 to 2 week period. And you can see that'd be like a 6% move in the markets. And that would happen probably over maybe 3, 4, 5 trading days. And we could make a lot of profit playing the bounce. So that's really what I'm looking for, is like that capitulation move and then just going long once everybody's panicking and then, playing the upside. Pretty similar thing here with the NASDAQ QQQ. We'll just rip through this really quickly. But, right at this 477 level, that's a low volume node as well. We could even bounce down around this 574 to 572 level. So that's what I'd be looking for there. And then we'd probably bounce back up to like this 505 level. Now, it's still possible that we could just like float up this week, but, then I'd have to reevaluate things. But really, I'm just being as patient as possible in the market because right now there's a lot going on with headlines. You can get trapped. We got CPI coming up, and then we got the FOMC meeting as well on the week of the 17th. That'll be on the 19th is when Jerome Powell's speaking. They're expected just to keep rates flat again with pretty much 100% probability. So I doubt that's going to happen. But you can see here that Bitcoin, I did draw this pretty steep bear flag. And usually the steeper a flag is, the more likely that it'll break down. So you can see that it's already sliced through this level after the crypto summit. Trump's not actually going to be buying any Bitcoin. He's just counting all the confiscated crypto that they have from the fraud and other abuse. And so, that's pretty bearish because people have been buying into this thinking like, they're going to create a reserve where they're actually just buying Bitcoin outright. And because that's not happening, you're going to have opposite reaction, right? So all the people that got caught buying into this will probably capitulate. And then I think, these levels that I've been looking at around like, once we hit this volume shelf around 77K, but ultimately down to like this 74K level is where I think we could have a stronger bounce in Bitcoin. So you could play either puts now down to that level or then play the bounce once we hit that level. But ultimately, if we are going to go into a recession, which is kind of what we are thinking at this point, because GDP was revised down from 2.7% all the way to negative 2.8%, I believe. So if Q1 is negative and Q2 is negative, then by definition, that's 2 quarters of contraction and we would be in a recession. Obviously, unemployment, payroll, all of those numbers are going to influence us as that data comes out over the next couple months. So really just going to be looking to see if we are actually going to tip into a recession, because if we do, we are probably going to see a bear market in not only crypto, but also U.S. equities. So that's really what I'm looking for. And that's going to bring down the value of a lot of stocks and give you the ability to buy in for the long term. It's really a gift. You want to buy houses or other assets when they're being foreclosed on. And that's kind of like what would happen in the event of a recession. All of these stocks would be trading at really steep discounts. And then you would just be buying in at cheap prices. It's worth more than what you're paying for. And over the long run, you will make a good amount of money. Now, NEO, this one we've been on. It's like one of the biggest positions in the trading account, as well as my long-term portfolio. I am bullish in NEO and BABA, as well as Grab. NEO did close above this mini pattern. That's actually somewhat of a bearish pattern. So we were trading in this somewhat of a rising wedge bearish flag, and we actually closed above that level. So I'm hoping that, with earnings coming up, I believe on Tuesday, we can have a break to the upside and push towards this $5 to $5.14 level again. And then if we can get over that, we are going to push much higher on NEO, since this is a very long duration downward trend, and a breakout would mean that we probably are going to be pushing $9, $10, $11, even $16 at some point. But it's going to take some time for that to play out, because how long the pattern takes to build is usually how long it could take to play out. So that's what I'd be looking for as well. But usually when it first gets that breakout, that move can be pretty vicious, have a lot of velocity behind it as buyers step in. So that's what I'm really looking for on NEO. And the CEO has also reiterated that they are going to try to meet their delivery numbers. And they even think that one of their lower model classes, the Envoy, will reach 40,000 units per month. So really bullish there on those delivery numbers. And the CEO has been talking and doing the walk. So let's hope he can deliver on that. Grab, this one was like in a bit of a, it's actually broken down, but it's forming a falling wedge. So
although you can see it did break below this trend line. You can see that broke down and then it bounced, broke down, and now it's bounced and actually closed right below the line. I was hoping we could get over this like 560 or 461 level and close above. But ultimately, you can see that we are forming somewhat of a falling wedge, right? So we are wedging and falling. And at some point, this could break to the upside. So that's really what I'm looking for on Grab over the next couple weeks, is we just break out of this, push back into this bigger, larger pattern. And this is consolidating over time out of a multi-year base. And so I'm really bullish on Grab for the long term. I think once this consolidation plays out, we will push above this 570 level, this bear gap that was previously formed. We'll go ahead and fill that and then hopefully push to the upside. The bearish case is maybe we do push above here, but then the market goes into a recession. We could fall back to this 441 level, even down to this 404 level. But at that point, I'm just buying a lot more of the company, because I know once things do settle down, take hold in the markets, we're going to go back into a bull market. And then, there's probably going to be some level of quantitative easing, lowering of rates, and this company is going to do really well over the long term. So just trying to get the best prices as possible, but accumulate as much shares of Grab and NIO that I can. Unless something fundamental with the company changes, I don't mind if the price goes lower. I'm just going to keep buying. Tesla, this one's in a really interesting pattern, and I'm going to rip through all these because they're all in very similar patterns because of how weak the market has been. But if you look at Tesla, it had this massive breakout previously, and if you go back to this date, you can see that this actually happened on election day, right? So on election day, it did create that gap. This was a bull gap, and then we had this really strong push. We consolidated in this range. You can see that we did eventually break above that pattern. That was an ascending triangle, which is bullish, and then we fell back into this bear flag. We eventually broke this down. The target of this bear flag was 325. We bounced off that level, came back up, and then we rejected, and now we are actually breaking below this longer term trend line, which is bearish. But because we're also gap filling that election gap from November, I do think that we are going to find some momentarily relief on Tesla. And I think that we could push back up to this 276 level, probably even potentially push back up to 300 is really what I'm looking for. Depending on where the market bottoms, obviously this could fall a bit more, but I do think that, this 242 level will also act as support. You really want to just time a market bottom with all of these stocks, right? So you have like these gap fills, they're near support. It's probably looking for a bounce. This is extremely oversold. If you look at RSI, you can see that it's at 26.7. So, often every time that it's come down to these lower levels, you'll see a somewhat of a bounce. Obviously, RSI could stay down here for a period of time and Tesla could fall lower. But even from like Bollinger Bands, it's just, moving averages, standard deviation variance from its averages. This thing is overdue for a bounce. So I do expect that to happen in the next week or two, and just trying to capture that move and just like maybe even wait for that move to start playing out and then just buy into the momentum and hope we get a move back up to like 300, 310, and even potentially up to like this 325 level, just depending how quickly that move happens. I do think it will eventually reject again, but for now, I just am looking to play the bounce on Tesla. And then Netflix, kind of a similar thing here. You had the gap up on earnings back in January. You can see it already came back down, completely filled the gap. Now that level is already bouncing. As you can see that it's bouncing out of that support zone. You could have bought calls on Friday. This could certainly push all the way back up to this gap and even push higher. Netflix is doing well as a company. So a lot of these stocks are kind of in that similar setup. Same thing here with AMD. We talked about this one in my last video. You can see that it's come down to this 94 to 99 level. and it's acted as support in that zone many, many different times. Ultimately, I do think that this will bounce out of here, out of this 99 level. We'll probably push back up to 113, especially if we break this recent downtrend that has been occurring. If we push, we could have a push above that, and that would be strong confirmation. You could either buy here or wait for that to break, which would be the safer option, and then just chase the breakout, especially if the market's bottoming. But if we do fall into a recession, even though I think that AMD is in my buy zone for the long term around $100, I still think that this 73 and even 56 level could trade, because ultimately the market will move stocks much further, either to the upside or to the downside, depending on how it moves, right? So if we go into a actual recession and over the next year, SPY drops 20, 25%, I still expect AMD to fall to these levels. Now, I do think AMD is a $200 stock, so I don't really care if it goes lower because I'm in this for the long term. I can sell puts, I can sell calls, I can buy shares, I can buy leaps. And I think that, in 2 years' time, this stock is going to be over 150, 160, even $200, especially if they start printing money again or lowering rates. So that's what I'm looking for on really all of these stocks, AMD especially, because it's so oversold already. Same thing with Amazon. This one's starting to come down. It actually broke through that 200 support zone, and it's coming back down to this stronger support zone at 189. I do find that level will probably act as some level of support. The market's starting to get to a point where it's going to need to bounce, so I really like it there. If it gets to 188, if you want to play some calls into April, I think that's a really solid position. Microsoft, this one is still a bit high for me. I do think that it will eventually break lower. You can see that this one tried to break down, snuck back over, and then eventually broke down again. Now that it's fallen, it's forming a bear flag. And so there's a few different ways I would play this. I could either wait to see if maybe it bounces to the upside. If it bounces to the upside, I would like to play puts on anywhere on the top of this trend line because it's in that flag and it will likely reject. So buying puts at any point where it can hit this upper level, that would be a good entry. Or if it breaks below this trend line, say over time it comes down and it breaks that trend line, that would be confirmation for me to buy puts. Alternatively, if you're bullish on Microsoft and it's near support, you could just play the bounce here and maybe it'll go all the way back up to this level. But nonetheless, I would look for a candle close on the daily below this trend line, or if it ever opens anywhere, if the price just touches this line anytime intraday, that's a good entry for puts. But ultimately, I do think this is a bearish pattern. It's at support. The stronger support line is down near this 363 level. So I do think that at some point this flag will eventually break down. The measured move of this flag is probably really close to that 363 level. And then I would like to play some calls there. So puts on any break or touch of the upper trend, and then target would be around 363, and then play calls once the price moves down there. Next, Disney, same thing. Like a lot of these stocks are all in these, they have these gap ups. This one had a gap down. Eventually it came back up and then it filled that gap. You can see it hit this upper trend line multiple times. It's rejected. And now it is in somewhat of a bull flag, right? So you have, this upper trend line, this lower trend line. It's reacted off that level. Now that we've kind of filled that gap, Disney might actually have found a bottom here. We'll see if it didn't quite fill it all the way. Maybe it'll come back down a little bit to this 102, 103 level, but I would like to play it to the upside. And then obviously the target would probably be somewhere near the upper trend line here, or even this 118 level. And then if it ever breaks out above this, that's really strong confirmation for a move higher. AVGO, this one had earnings recently. You can see that it had this gap as well on earnings, and it's come down, it's filled that gap, and now it's reversing to the upside. So usually whenever you have a gap fill, you do have a reversal on price, whether it was a gap up or a gap down.
So you can always play it that way. Celsius, this one I kind of like long term. This is the energy drink company. They partner with Pepsi, but you could see that it actually had this really strong gap up off after earnings. They did buy one of their biggest competitors. It was like I'm not sure the exact buyout price. It was in the billions of dollars, I believe. But you can see that it did have that gap up, and then it had another gap up here all the way up to $34, $35. So it had this really strong move. It did reject, but ultimately it came back down and it touched this lower gap, and that gap acted as support. And now you're having this push to the upside. I do think that long term, this is a stock that, Monster Energy, Coca-Cola, Celsius is a really competitive product. And once Bang Energy, I don't think people really drink Bang Energy as much anymore. Celsius has kind of dominated the energy drink market, especially amongst like fitness influencers and things like that, and even some gaming content. I see people promoting Celsius pretty often. I think Celsius, with their growth rate, I think they're going to return to, growing at the rate that they were. They sell through Pepsi. Pepsi puts in orders, and they had somewhat of a bullwhip effect where they ordered too many in the prior year. And so Celsius sales actually lagged in the last year, but now I think that all of that inventory has been cleared out, and so they can put in another order and show growth to the upside. So I think Celsius is actually going to be a really good stock for the long term. It's definitely good at these price points around 25, 27, even anything under $34, I think is really solid. You can see that it's come down quite a bit. It is selling at a discount. Obviously, timing the bottom is always a difficult thing, but I think in the long term, this stock is probably closer to $50 to $60 on any conservative valuation. And then looking at NVIDIA, this is the last one we'll cover. You can see it did break down. So this is really bearish. If you've been following along since the start of my channel, since December, I've said that AI, semiconductors, all these stocks are in a bubble. And now we're starting to see that actually play out, right? So you had like the DeepSeek drop. We came all the way down to this 114 level. We held this trend line, right? So you see that we're holding that trend line. We did bounce, but ultimately we came back and we actually broke below this level. Now we're looking at this 101 level to trade. That level may act as support. As you can see, it's a previous gap as well as where price likes to bounce. So there could be some level of support here. That'll probably time with the market, and then we'll have a bounce. But ultimately, I do see NVIDIA heading much lower. This is a stock that I wouldn't buy today, even at current prices, even at 102. I do think that it will get down to like this 96 level. It'll fill that gap again. And then ultimately, I do think that this stock could fall much further to around $74. And that's a really big discount. If that happens, this would likely mean that the market is going into some level of a recession. But because we've broken this trend line that was formed over a year, I would like to see that this stock probably forms some level of lower lows and lower highs and ultimately gets down to this 74 level. If it ever does get down there, that's going to be a really strong bounce zone from that gap. I do think that NVIDIA is still a solid company for the long term. It's just that AI and semis are overvalued and need some level of a correction. And just like the dot-com bubble, I think that a lot of the Mag 7 stocks need to have a much larger correction than even what we're seeing today. I think that there will be a relief bounce, but ultimately later this year or early next year, we're probably going to see lower lows. So hope you enjoyed this video. A lot to cover. Be very patient. Obviously, if VIX gets over 30, then you can really start considering buying some calls over the next 2 or 3 weeks, or even shorting volatility, because ultimately I don't think Trump is going to try to crash the market or anything like that. This is going to be a long drawn out move in the market. And, depending on how things change, I'll continue to put out videos and show you what my thoughts are. But just stay patient. size down and just wait for that really strong confirmation to play a bounce. And I'll see you in the next video, guys. Peace.